Hi there. So for about 10 days, I've been working on this really cool, really fun digital clock simulator in JavaScript. Okay, so it's got all the bells and whistles. You can adjust the hour. You can mess around with the minutes. You even got the little snooze light button. Okay, so it's quite practical, and the fun thing about this is it's based off of this real alarm clock that I just have on my desk. Okay, so it's a pretty much perfect one-to-one replica. So you can see, just like the app, you have to press this time this time button to change the hour as well as the minute. You can switch to alarm settings. You can turn the light on. So basically every single thing about this little alarm clock I have here, okay, is in this JavaScript app. I want to educate you, walk you through the logic of this code, because I really do think it's interesting. It's quite informative, instructive. I think this is a really good video for understanding some good programming practices. And just to throw this out here, I did not vibe code this. I learned JavaScript to do this, okay? So the first thing we have is a class, right? And what does every class or what does every clock have? That's right, an hours, a minutes, and then you need to keep track of, whether it's the AM or the PM. So I have a constructor here that takes all three of those parameters, okay? And, this is some really good programming practice. Here's the first tip. It's defensive programming. So here I have a couple of checks. You can see these if statements that check the validity of these parameters, okay? So for example, we're checking if the hour that's passed in is valid. Because, if the hour is not between 1 and 12, that's going to be a problem. By the way, this is not a military clock, so the hours must be between 1 and 12 inclusive. Similarly, we check the minutes, 0 and 59, that's the range. And then, of course, our AM and PM down over here, right? And then if all of those conditions are in fact not full of errors, so in other words, they are all valid, then we can finally initialize our fields, the hours, minutes, and AM or PM, right? Okay, and then here's, just another simple method we have here. It's called increment hour, okay? So the way this clock here works, right, is when you press the, I don't know if this is catching on screen, but when you press this, right, you can increment the hour up to 12, right? And then when you press again, it loops back to 1. Okay, so that's what this if statement right here that I'm highlighting is doing. Okay, it's checking if the hour is greater than or equal to 1, but less than 12. Okay, and if the hour does hit 12, at that point, it's going to just go back to 1. So it's basically wrapping around to 1. Okay, and here is where we set the AM or PM. Okay, once we hit 12, it's going to toggle. If it's AM, I'll switch to PM. If it's PM, I'll switch to AM. Okay, so quite simple right there. Similarly, we have an increment minutes method. Okay, it's very simple. It just goes from 0 to 59, and the same idea with the hours, right? Here is just like kind of a helper method, you could call it. It just gets the hour-minute string. Okay, so that's basically, for example, going to display 5:16 and then AM or PM. Okay, and then here are the static methods that we're checking the validity of the parameters in the constructor. Okay, so yeah, just checking if it's a valid hour, minute, or AM and PM. Okay, and over here, just some standard setters, right? We're just setting the values of the alarm. We have some getters here as well to get the hour, the minutes, the AM, PM, the alarm status, and then some more setters. And again, this is really important to have some kind of check. Right, so here we're just simply checking, just like the constructor really, is this a valid hour? And if it's not, throw an error. That's really important. You want to always tell the user what is wrong, right? Or at least the programmer who sees your error. You need to tell them what is actually wrong. Okay, and then at that point, then you can actually set your value because it's safe. Okay, so this is all the same, so I'm going to skip through it. So here we're just going to instantiate, okay, the clock classes with the current time. It's most useful when you open the app, of course, to display the current time instead of some random time. That'd be kind of dumb, right? So you want to display the current time, of course, and what we're doing here, okay, I'm going to scroll a little bit to the right, is I'm going to call a method that just gets the current time. And I'm not going to show you that method, okay? it just does exactly what it says. Okay, you don't need to know the implementation. Black box principle for all you programmers out there. Here's the cool part. We have two different times, okay? So on this actual alarm clock, you can't see this, but there are two different modes, okay? There's clock time, which is basically what time is it now? Okay, so when you look at the clock, what time is it now? That's clock time. Okay, and then there's alarm time, which is self-explanatory. It just tells you, hey, you know, buddy, you got to wake up at this time. So set your alarm, set your time, wake up at this time, right? So these are the two times that we need to keep track of, okay? I want you to remember that. There's clock time and there's alarm time. And then here, this is the really special part, okay? It's called active clock. And this is really important. You'll see why later, but just note that this is used for something called reference swapping, okay? Over here, we just have some stylistic things. Don't worry about that too much. Going back, or going forward over here, okay, very simple. We get the hour button. We attach an event listener. We add an event listener to detect for clicks. If you click the hour button, very simple, right? You increment the hour from our digital clock class, right? And then you'll display the time, okay? Same thing for the minute button. I mean, I don't really need to explain this too much. You just click the minute button, it will increment your minutes, right? And also display the time. The light button, this is the fun part. So, you know, you click the snooze button here, you know, you get a little LCD light, and you know, it's pretty cool and neat. So yeah, you know, you get the same thing here by just, you set the alarm status. Okay, you know what, ignore this. I actually have not completed this code, but the idea is, here you're just displaying the light, and that does work, okay? So with all this code we have thus far that I've described, it's not very useful. It's just going to display a static time, okay? The time isn't going to change. We need to increment the time somehow. So how do we do that? Well, here I have a set interval method. So the idea is, okay, every 1,000 milliseconds, which is every second, okay, it's going to run this code. Okay, so what is this code doing? Well, it's going to check, hey, is the seconds 60? Well, 60 seconds is 1 minute, right? So we want to increment the minutes once that happens. And then we want to set, or reset rather, the seconds back to 0, right? And then, you know, well, let's say the minutes is 0. What does that imply? Well, if you roll, you know, 60 seconds to 1 minute, 60 minutes, if it rolls back to 0, that means that's 1 hour, right? There's 60 minutes in 1 hour. So we got to increment the hour, right? And then we just display the time, okay? And then here, you know, it's just kind of a nice, fun little thing. In the tab for the web page, it'll display the current time. So yeah, that's kind of cool, right? And then, of course, at the very last point, we have to increment the seconds, okay? So all this does is literally just displays the time updating as a normal functioning real clock would, okay? It's an accurate simulation. Now, for the time buttons and alarm buttons, remember there's two modes, clock time and alarm time, right? So here all we are doing, okay, here's the cool part. Here's the important part, listen up, okay? So active clock, remember, I mentioned this is something called reference swapping. Here, when we click the time button, okay, we want to swap the reference active clock has to the clock time. Okay, and then we're going to display the time. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, the active clock is simply, I mean, as the name implies, the clock that is currently active. Or in other words, the button, the mode the user selects, the time the clock should display. There we go. That's what the active clock is. Okay, so when we set it to clock time, we're saying, hey, you know, make this display the time for the clock, which makes sense because it's the time button, right? Okay, and then we just have some more style things. This is just gonna make the button look nice. It doesn't do anything important though. Same thing for the alarm time, right? If we click the alarm button, we want to swap the reference for active clock to the alarm time. We're gonna say, hey, the active clock is now set for the alarm. This is the alarm switch. So on this clock, you can't see, but there is an on-off button, and that on-off button is for setting the alarm, okay, turning the alarm on or off. And that's exactly what this does. If you click on it, you know, this is kind of neat. It's standard, but it's neat. You can toggle a Boolean like this, right? So basically what I'm saying here is I'm going to set the active clock alarm status to the opposite of what it currently is. Okay, that's what the not does here. So you can toggle booleans by just putting a not in front of it, and then it'll go true, false, true, false, true, false. So it's basically turning it on, off, on, off. Here's one of my favorite parts, keyboard shortcuts. So this is really neat, okay? Okay, there, the lighting's a little better there. So these are buttons, right? I didn't need to tell you that. And this is a mouse. It's not very fun to just, it is okay, it's kind of fun, but it's not super fun to like, you know, move your mouse around and click on the buttons. It's way cooler to press, you know, physical buttons like, you know, it's an actual clock. So I was looking at this clock and I was like, hey, wait a minute. This is basically a space bar. And then I realized, wait a minute, the C, V, B, N, and M buttons perfectly map to these buttons. Like it's literally made for the keyboard. So this is really awesome. Okay, this is the coolest part in my opinion. Okay, so here's how it works. So here we are checking if, we're basically adding, okay, to the document. So it's saying, I want to add an event listener to basically listen, to hear all the keys that are being pressed on this document. Okay, and with keys pressed down, what are we going to do? Well, if the key is C, okay, that means that C has been held down. So I have a Boolean, just going to assign it to true. Okay, and you'll see why later. And then we're going to display the time. Okay, and then if it's V, well, what does that map to? That maps to CV, so that's going to be the alarm. Okay, so if it's V, we're going to, again, reference swap active clock to the alarm time. All right, display the time. Here, we're just going to say, if either C is held down or V is held down, that means we are selecting a mode to change the time for. We don't know exactly what mode that is based on this if statement alone, but it doesn't matter because we have that active clock. Okay, and the active clock is the only thing that the program cares about when it's changing the time. Hence the beauty of this setup. Okay, so when we press N, while we're holding either the C or V key for clock time or alarm time, okay, we're going to increment the hour. Okay, N simply increments the hour. Doesn't matter which clock it's for, it'll just increase the hour by 1. We'll display that updated time with that new hour, and you know, just another style thing over here. For M, that maps to minutes on the keyboard. Okay, so we're just going to increment minutes, right? Over here we have, oh, and this is just another thing. B, so B key, that's in the middle of the keyboard, right above the space. That is for the on-off. Okay, it just does that. Lastly, the space. This is my favorite key button because it looks exactly like, you know, the slightly elongated snooze button on the physical clock. You click space, it'll display the light. And here we have a set timeout. So set timeout will simply wait this amount of time and then run this code. And this will just make the button shrink a little, so it looks like it's being pressed when you click, or when you press the space bar, okay? And then we display the light, of course. Okay, key up. So when you release the key, okay, that's the important part. When the key is C, that means that we're no longer holding our C key down, so C held is false. Okay, when we release the V, now we got to switch back, right? Because that means, okay, so this is like kind of difficult to explain, but anyway, when you click on the alarm, I don't know, yeah, you can see that. See how it changes? So when I'm holding the alarm button right now. If I release it, it changes back to the clock time, okay? So the analog of that in JavaScript code is saying, when I release the V key, which corresponds to the alarm time, when I release that, I'm going to switch back to the clock time. That's exactly what I showed you right here, okay? And after I switch back to the clock time, I'm going to display the active time. So that's how that works. And don't worry about this, it's just style again. Okay, oh, here is the other cool part. A settings panel. You know, you can export the time. What does that mean? So let's look at the function export time, okay? I'm just gonna do a little control F. Little movement over here, yeah. Okay, very simple. It just gets the hour minute string that we talked about earlier. It'll return it, and then it'll give you a little prompt. Okay, and that prompt will be like, hey, you know, just copy paste this, and then you can basically import your progress or import the clock save state on a different device. Okay, so it's a really neat little save function that I added. Similarly, we have an import function that does a whole bunch of validation. I'm not going to go into it with too much detail, but I will go over it later on. That's all that does. We have a random time. Okay, so you can get a random hour, set the hour to a random hour. You can set to a random minute, set to a random AM, PM, and then display that time. Very simple. We can also reload the screen to reset the clock to its original time, which is very useful. And when I say original time, I mean like the current time. So that's very useful there. A full screen. I won't go into this. It's quite convoluted code, but it just full screens. Okay. And lastly, this just displays the clock without all the text you saw on the very beginning of this video. Okay. So let's go over this function. Okay, so this is definitely a long function. It checks if the import string is valid. Okay, so checking validity is very important in programming, and you're going to see how I do it here. First thing I do, I trim the string. Trimming just removes the excess white space at the beginning and the end of the string. Very common sort of pre-processing step. And then I do some checks, right? So I check, did you enter anything? If you didn't enter anything, well, that you better enter something, right, buddy? And then over here, I do some checks about the input. Is it formatted correctly? Because the format is clock time space AM PM space alarm time space AM PM. Okay, so in other words, if there's not a total of 4 elements, those 4 things I mentioned earlier, that's not a valid import string. So I have to basically display an error, an alert message, okay? I check if it's a valid hour-minute string, okay? Because the user can put in some, some doo-doo like 4263 p.m., which is not valid. So this will basically check, if that's, if it's okay or not. We check if it's a valid AM or PM string for the clock time. We check if it's a valid AM PM string for the alarm time over here, and just no, don't do that. And yeah, I'll just return true at the end if it passes all the checks. The import time function, okay, is definitely a lot, but I'll explain it. First, you got to split by spaces, because remember, the export string is split by spaces. You have your clock time space AM PM space alarm time AM PM, right? So you got to split all those things so you get each of those elements in an array. Okay, and then from there you want to parse out the hours and then set the clock time to its corresponding hours and minutes. Do the same thing for the alarm time. You parse the hour-minute string to extract the hours and minutes, and then set the alarm time to those corresponding values, okay? And this is the display time function. It simply displays what is the time for the active clock, as well as some other important indicators, such as the alarm on indicator. So if the alarm is on, it will also display that on the screen, the time screen. Yeah, so I think that's about it, really.